If the Colts are going to make the playoffs in 2024, who are the 5 most important players that they need to help them get there? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the evening. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, which helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Just post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. What is up, friends? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of horseshoehuddle.com. I am your resident media member for the site, and Zach is your resident film expert from the site. And today we are gearing up for camp. The Colts report on Wednesday. First practice is Thursday. And we're just kind of putting a bow on this offseason stuff and kind of gathering our final takes before camp actually starts in earnest. So today we want to tell you guys, we're going to give you each of our own top 5 lists of the 5 most important Colts players, specifically for the team's success this year. If they're going to make the playoffs, the 5 most important players that factor into this, non-Anthony Richardson included, because that is too easy. We would take up probably at minimum 3 to 4 minutes of your time just to talk about the most obvious thing. So we're going to go ahead and talk about each of our top 5 most important players. And at the end, we will tell you about the players that we absolutely agonized over leaving off of the list. But without further ado, Zach, I'll roll out the red carpet here. Who is your most important non-Anthony Richardson player this year?
Yeah, so before we jump into it, I do want to clarify to the football gods out there that this is not a hit list. We're not trying to give you guys any ideas on who to take down from the Indianapolis Colts, knock on wood and everything when it comes to this list. But I think my first one's going to be a bit of a shocker and a bit of a weird one here. But at number 1, I actually went with Braden Smith as my number 1 most critical player on the team for the Colts to make the playoffs besides Anthony Richardson. And I think the big reasoning behind this is one, the big drop off from starter to backup. I mean, from Braden Smith to Blake Freeland last year was, the second biggest drop off. Obviously, the Grover Stewart to his backup last year was the worst one for the Colts. But when you look at the on off splits with Braden Smith and Blake Freeland, it was just crazy. It was crazy to look at. I did an article on it recently when I talked about Braden Smith, the potential of him not being here after this next season. And the Colts run game was almost a yard per carry better in games that Braden Smith played, like a majority of the games. So pretty much every game he started outside that Titans game where he left after 3 snaps. The Colts were almost a whole yard per better on yards per carry in the run game. Their passing game, Braden Smith allowed a quarter of the pressures that Blake Freeland did, and Freeland only played like 100 more snaps than him. Freeland allowed 4 sacks, 4 quarterback hits. Braden Smith allowed 0 sacks, only 1 QB hit on the year. This is all according to Pro Football Focus. And that's just the stats right there. Just the eye test too. You could see, I think the greatest example obviously was that Houston Texans game last year in week 18, where the Colts are running the ball at will. Jonathan Taylor's breaking off 10+ yard runs constantly in that week 18 game. Braden Smith leaves the game with that injury that he just couldn't play on anymore halfway through the third quarter. And then the Colts run game just ground to a complete stop. They were averaging like 2 yards a carry at that point. I know Taylor was a little banged up too at that point late in the game, but you could really see the difference between having a Blake Freeland out there and a Braden Smith. So I think if the Colts are going to be a playoff team this next season, it really comes down to the health of Braden Smith. How many games are they getting really good to elite offensive tackle play at that right tackle spot? And just the difference that he brings in the run game in general, you want to have that out there. I know Anthony Richardson's going to be a boost. I know a healthy Jonathan Taylor is going to be a boost. But it really needs that player at right tackle that is Braden Smith. So Braden Smith was my number 1 for this list. Technically, my 1 and 2 are kind of co-1 and 2s, and you'll understand why when we get to the second segment. But Braden Smith, just for the massive drop-off behind him, how good he was last year when he played, and what he brings not to just the run game and the passing game. I think he's just a huge part of the Colts offensive success.
Yeah, I do like that one. It's Braden was one I wasn't really sure where to slot him. He's no doubt critical. Again, like you mentioned, the statistics in the run game in particular, he's always been known for that, and he's an incredibly strong player. But, I mean, he only played half the year. I think it was, right there around the 8 or 9 games, however many you want to factor in due to, very limited snaps in a couple of those starts. But that's like the second season where the guy has not allowed a sack, I believe. He had 1 year where he had one or none. So the guy, when he's on, he's lights out in pass pro as well. So very, very good player. It's unfortunately someone they've had to get used to life without it sometimes. But obviously, hopefully, if he plays even the majority of the games next year, that's going to be an enormous boost, not just for Richardson, but really for everybody. So for my number one, I factor in drop off to the next player. I factor in, what I think their usage to the team is going to be and how critical their involvement is. And I actually have Jonathan Taylor as my next one up after Anthony Richardson, because if the Colts have it their way, it will be a heavy dose of Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, not just their usage and their, how they're actually going to be run and everything, but the threat. Again, we've talked all offseason about what it does to defenses, just making them guess and not being able to disguise things as much and not being able to be cute, like having Richardson and Taylor out there. And plus we've seen, Jonathan Taylor carried the Carson Wentz offense in 2021 to the doorstep of the playoffs then too. And that was with a quarterback that the team had to hide for the second half of the season. So part of this is, I think Jonathan Taylor is going to get back being closer to the 2021 version. Because I have to hold on to every ounce of hope that that's still there, because that's a special player to watch. Like sitting there watching 2021, especially in person at Lucas Oil Stadium, I was like, I just feel like I'm watching history right now. And so if he can get back to being remotely close to that, which again, week 18, we saw him pop off for a huge game against the Texans. So we know he's still there. If he's healthy and he's able to be used running behind Braden Smith, your number one as well, with Anthony Richardson and his full usage, then he could perhaps be considered the team's MVP by the end of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's really funny. You can see the fantasy football guy that you are and the film nerd that I am. I'm
right.
going offensive line, you're going the skill position player. But
that's right.
I think the one thing I can always say about Jonathan Taylor, especially with, again, how he finished last season, is such a big thing. 96 yards against the Raiders, over 200 yards against the Texans, just a great stamp on the end of last season to carry into this year. But the biggest thing you can say about Taylor when it comes to this offense is the NFL game is built around elite skill position players. It is. Like, offensive linemen are awesome. And I know, like, when you look at the 49ers offense, obviously you talk about Trent Williams and all that too, but like, it's the elite skill position players. That's what everything. You look at the teams in the Super Bowl last year: Travis Kelce on one side, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk on the other, Christian McCaffrey on the other side. That team is insane. But you're looking at those skill position players. Who are your difference makers? Who are your guys who can go out there and make a play for you? And I think to a degree, Michael Pittman Jr. is that for the Colts. But the one elite skill position player they have on this team is Jonathan Taylor. If he can get even remotely back to that 2021 version, they have an elite playmaker at maybe not the most valuable position, but at a valuable position, a guy who can create plays and make things happen. So, yeah, if Jonathan Taylor is healthy, I can totally see him being the team MVP this year, because we've seen him do it in the past. And again, the way he finished last season, I think it was 300 yards rushing in the final 2 games combined. That's elite Jonathan Taylor again. We'll gladly take that going into next season. So as long as he returns to form like the Colts are expecting, I have no problem with you having Jonathan Taylor at number 1 on this list.
Yeah, I didn't expect that to be the case, but also the most important thing an offensive skill position player can do is score, and he is an elite touchdown scorer. Like, anytime they get inside that 10-yard line, you've got to bank on it either being Anthony or Jonathan getting into that paint. So, I think he's going to be pretty important. I think he's going to put up lots of points. So coming up next, who are our numbers 2 and 3? I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, of course, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. That means there's something for everybody, every day, all summer long. We have arrived at the week in which training camp begins, so get on FanDuel right now and place your bets for what over-unders you think which Colts will meet on their stats. What do you think AR is going to do? Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman. You smell a breakout from one of the tight ends. What do you think they're going to do? Go place all your bets now because, I mean, when you're right, you could tell everyone that you told them so. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. A free 24/7 sports streaming channel is programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels. That part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, everydayers who are joining us here at 9:30 p.m. on a Monday night. We appreciate all of you guys joining the live stream. If you aren't checking out the live stream, we will be going live. Obviously, a lot more coming up with training camp. The times will vary, so make sure you're following us on social medias to get the times of when we are going to go live throughout all training camp, typically around 4 or 5-ish in the afternoon, but you know, life happens, guys. But getting to our number 2 and number 3 most important players, Jake, I will roll out the red carpet for you now because I'm the one leading this segment. Who is your number 2 on your top 5 most important Colts players, non-Anthony Richardson, obviously, going into this upcoming season?
Well, so I have a feeling from context clues that I might be sniping you here, but we can have the same number 2. I've got Bernhard Raimann as number 2. So number 1, this is a young ascending player who is quickly making a case for being one of the better left tackles in the league if he keeps on the trajectory that he's going. But we've also seen how much of a nightmare it can be when the Colts don't have their left tackle. And that goes back years. Anytime Anthony Costanzo has had to miss, any of the weird replacements he's had who have had to play, anytime the Colts have not had their left tackle, it has been a nightmare. And I think the Colts probably have a little more help at right tackle than at left tackle. Blake Freeland's probably a little more natural there, even though he definitely needs room to grow. Matt Gonsalves, you've got to think that's probably more of a right tackle situation as well. I don't know. I just need to see more of what their depth at left tackle is before I can really anoint someone a quality backup there. But no, I think Raimann's abilities both in the run game and pass pro, becoming a very well-rounded player just like Braden Smith. It might surprise some people, but, that was the Colts' 2 highest graded offensive linemen last year, according to PFF. He gets some ill-timed penalties and some occasional, gives up the big sack at bad times, but the guy is getting better without a doubt. You're having to hear his name called less and less, which for an offensive lineman, that's the best thing. You don't ever want to hear the offensive lineman's name over the broadcast unless they're, waxing poetic about how good they are. So I think Raimann is doing a much better job, going in that second year. We heard great things all offseason about how he's progressing into this third year and, what he's done to help get even better. So I think, and obviously Anthony Richardson being a right-handed quarterback, there is some importance still for the blind side, even though it has leveled out and it's not such that albatross between the left tackle and the right tackle and the difference in importance. There is still something to that. And the name of the game right now is keeping Anthony Richardson healthy.
Yeah, and I'll be quick with mine because we have the same player at number 2, Bernhard Raimann, and maybe it just shows how I view the offensive tackle position, especially when you have a young quarterback. It's immensely valuable to protect that quarterback. Anthony Richardson's going to take more hits than most quarterbacks because of his play style, because of the design quarterback run game. You have to have quality offensive tackle play for him to stay sturdy in the pocket, him to grow from the pocket. So Braden Smith on one side and Bernhard Raimann on the other. And one thing I want to say real quick is, Shane Steichen with his offensive tackles has a very symbiotic relationship where he trusts them to be on an island more than most teams in the NFL. I think besides the Philadelphia Eagles, the Colts left their offensive tackles on an island more than any other team, again, besides the Eagles. Now, he does protect them a bit because they do a lot of RPO and a lot of screen game stuff and a lot of quick game stuff. So it's not really like they're doing full, like true pass sets a lot, but he trusts those guys to be on islands. And it's one thing to do that with Bernhard Raimann, with Braden Smith, or like when he was with Philly, like Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson. It's one thing to do it with those guys. It's another thing to do it with Blake Freeland and to do it with Mac and Salves and do it with, Joe or Jake Witt or whoever his name is there, Jake Witt. It's one thing to do with those guys compared to your top starters on the outside. So I think having Raimann and Braden Smith healthy this season and effective in playing their best football, I think that is immensely valuable for the Colts in 2024, and that's why they're my top two. Now, I think we're going to have the same number 3 as well, Jay, because that's just how we are as people.
Oh, yeah.
But I still have an offensive player at number 3.
Yep.
But I didn't go with Jonathan Taylor. I went with Michael Pittman Jr. At number 3. Yep. So I'm assuming you have him there, too. And the reason I went with Michael Pittman Jr. at number 3 is we saw, again, the drop-off when he was out in a game. And it came at a really unfortunate time late last season where when the game that Michael Pittman Jr. missed with his concussion symptoms was the game against the press man coverage team. Was the team, the Atlanta Falcons, are going to get in your face, they're going to hit you with press, and they're going to attack those run lanes, and they're going to make your receivers win on the outside. And we saw last year with the Colts, they just didn't have any receivers besides Michael Pittman Jr. who could win on the outside one-on-one. Downs is great in the slot, but it's a different story right there. So Michael Pittman Jr. is the engine that drives this offense, that drives the passing game. He is their pace setter. He's their RPO man who, when they're going to pull that out, they're going to hit him over the middle. They're going to hit him on screens. They're going to let him work after the catch. He's their intermediate guy. He's their over the middle guy. A big third down, who are they going to go to? They're going to go to Michael Pittman Jr. most times. I mean, if they're not isolating a tight end, they're going to go to Michael Pittman Jr. on some kind of mesh concept or some kind of in-breaker or, something down the field, because that is the guy who drives this offense. Now, until we see more from like A.D. Mitchell or some more growth from Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman Jr. is going to be in the top 5 for me, because as of right now, he's the guy that we know we can trust in the passing game to be that guy who can win on the outside and win when it counts. And I don't know if we have that anywhere else. Like Downs can win his unfair matchups. He can win his matchups against linebackers and safeties, which is great. I mean, that's perfect for him. But Michael Pittman Jr., when it all comes down to it, he's the guy who's going to make a play. We saw it in big games against the Raiders last year. We saw it against the Steelers last year, how big an impact he had before his injury. We saw it in the Browns game, that big 70-yard touchdown catch he had. Michael Pittman Jr. is the guy who drives the passing game in this offense, and he's going to be in my top 3, obviously, because of that.
Yeah, and that's a guy we made a joke, him and Grover Stewart proved their worth and, need for new contract figures as soon as they missed time last year. That Falcons game was awful. Now, quarterback factors into this as well, but there was no passing game without Michael Pittman Jr. The defense knew exactly how they could smother the Colts, and the Colts do have some talented players. Just like you mentioned, Josh Downs is going to win his matchups. But until someone steps up at tight end and takes over that mismatch, quick winner ability, A.D. Mitchell, we don't know yet. Alec Pierce obviously has a lot of room to grow to blossom into a more complete receiver. This is a lot of this is about the drop off. They just don't have that dog to take over. Like Pittman can do pretty much everything. Yes. We've seen in certain seasons of his career, Carson Wentz proved that Pittman could win downfield. Now he's not going to be an elite separator downfield, of course, but he's a great contested catch guy as well. Makes those tough catches over the middle, gets hit a lot over the middle and hangs on, has great hands. So he's not just a possession receiver, but that part of his game, he's an elite possession receiver, that portion of it. So yeah, can't divulge too much more on that, because I mean, we've talked a lot about him this offseason, and he's just until someone else steps up, he is as good as gold to that passing game.
Yeah, for sure. He's just, again, I feel I like using the term pace setter for him because he's the guy who's going to keep the offense on track. And if the offense falls off track, he's going to be the guy who gets them back on track, like we saw in Week 1 against the Jaguars last year with that screenplay touchdown. Off a big penalty, they get moved back, 2nd and 20, screenplay touchdown, 40-something yards. Anthony Richardson's first touchdown pass in the NFL. So yeah, Michael Pittman Jr. is I wouldn't say he's a star player like Jonathan Taylor, but he's very, very big for the success of this Colts offense.
Yeah, and I always want to commend him for this. The guy has improved his statistics every year despite not having the same quarterback.
Right.
For a receiver who isn't really always heralded as, like, a lot of people say he's not a true number one, or they're like, yeah, but he's not Julio Jones, which is like, who is? But like, for a guy like that to be successful, no matter what, he increases targets, receptions, like yardage. He is always improving on his game, and he finds himself up there among the top of the league these last few years, really.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So coming up, who rounds out our lists, and who are we upset that we just could not fit onto the list? When you're hiring for a small business, you want to find quality professionals who are actually right for your role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It's got the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn also isn't just a job board either, because they help you hire professionals who you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but who might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats right now, and they just don't always have the time and resources to actually do the hiring. But LinkedIn is always finding new ways to make the process easier, which is why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's say we get some defense going here, bud. We've paid attention to some skill position guys and some of the big dogs up front, but we got to get some defense going. You got one for me at 4?
Yes, I do, and I think that's the biggest surprise on the list. I mean, I don't know. Braden Smith might have been a big surprise there at number 1 as well, considering how much time he's missed. But it's another guy who's missed a lot of time. But again, it's about the drop off for me. And like, this is a good player who the drop off behind him is so massive that I had to have him this high. And I have Julian Blackmon at number 4. And it's, again, I don't think Julian Blackmon is an all-pro or even a Pro Bowl level player, but he's a good, solid, starting strong safety in the NFL. Did a lot of good things for the Colts last year. And like Grover Stewart, like Michael Pittman Jr., I mean, the Colts are really unfortunate that, like, the guys who showed their worth were the guys who are hitting free agency.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Blackmon, he didn't actually get to make the money off it. But yeah, Julian Blackmon just doesn't really have anyone behind him that I trust to, like, even remotely to the same degree as him on the football field. We saw last year in the final 2 games, the Colts were essentially in win and get in mode in those final 2 games. Like, they had to win both of those games to make the playoffs. And they were rolling out Nick Cross and Ronnie Harrison. And Ronnie Harrison was a linebacker for the team. They put him back there because they didn't trust Rodney Thomas anymore. Obviously, Trevor Denbo's a special teamer. And it didn't go super well. I mean, the Raiders and the Texans threw the ball all over them. There were some deep completions. And Nick Cross had his worst 2 games of the season when he was showing some really good signs before that. So I think the drop-off from Julian Blackmon to the guys behind him is almost as big as the Braden Smith drop-off on this roster right now, or the Bernhard Raimann drop-off even. It's just, look, I know what I get in Julian Blackmon. I get an above-average starter who does some good things, who clicks and closes downhill really well, who can be a playmaker, who can end games with his ball skills alone. Behind him, I have Ronnie Thomas, who the coaching staff lost trust in last year. I have Trevor Denbo and Marcel Dabo. Like, I don't have anything behind him right now. So unless the Colts fix that, Julian Blackmon is going to be one of the most important players to the team. And again, it's unfortunate that 2 of my top 5 players so far are guys who have not finished seasons the last couple of years in Braden Smith and Julian Blackmon, but that's the nature of where we're at with this Colts team right now. And I had Julian Blackmon at number 4 on my most important Colts players.
Yeah, I love that pick for you because I absolutely love Julian Blackmon. Like literally the only gripe I would have about him is that we can't see enough of him because he has, trouble playing a full season. But everything he does for the Colts is so important. Like he is the leader back there vocally in the secondary. We've seen him play at a high level at free safety, strong safety, and nickel. Right now, when talk about safety, it is one of the biggest drop-offs on the entire roster because he's the only safety on your roster that the coaching staff can trust. They don't know for certain that Nick Cross is the starting free safety yet. They may have to go back to Rodney Thomas. They may have to bite the bullet and sign a free agent. We don't know that yet. But unfortunately, the only safety they've got right now that they can trust is someone who has not been able to play a full season. But the guy is a playmaker. Again, versatile, super high football IQ. He can take the ball away. I think he had like 2 or 3. He was involved in like 2 or 3 takeaways last year that got negated by penalty or, review said that ball carrier was down, this or that. So the guy was making plays constantly last year when he was out there. So absolutely love that pick for you. For me, I'm staying in the secondary and the other reliable veteran. I'm going with Kenny Moore out of the nickel. When the Colts see Kenny Moore playing like he's playing and he's comfortable and he's happy, like he's one of the best defensive backs the Indianapolis Colts have ever had. Watching him in his final season or 2 under Matt Eberflus was a masterclass in, he was a genius in the defense. Like he was beyond the point of just playing in the defense to where he could actually bait the offense into what he wanted them to do. And some of the things he can do is just so special. And you got worried after, 2 years ago when he had the really rough season in the first season at Gus Bradley, that maybe that guy wasn't there anymore. But, they kind of came to an understanding and he got rededicated to the team. They paid him to be the highest paid slot once again. And we're back to seeing a guy who is one step ahead of the offense. Again, he made some really, really special plays last year. And without that was a really young, beat-up cornerback group. I think it'll be better this year, but Kenny's impact back there in that secondary, I don't think could ever be overstated.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a defense that doesn't have many playmakers, and he's one of the big playmakers on this defense right now. I'll hit my number 5 here real quick, and also talk about my final cuts before I hit number 5. So before I got to number 5, Grover Stewart was one of my last guys on, just because, again, the drop-off we saw last year. I think Raekwon Davis kind of covers that up a little bit more this year. So that's why Grover Stewart just missed. Jonathan Taylor obviously just missed as well. Laiatu Latu I considered too, and this isn't because of the drop-off, just because he's the big unknown in the pass rush room. Like, if he can just be what we hope he can be, then that's a big difference maker. But ultimately at number 5, I went with DeForest Buckner, just because, again, when we're talking about superstars on the roster, star players on this roster, DeForest Buckner is one of the de facto stars on this team. Like, he is one of the guys where you just know what you're getting every single year. You're going to get around 7-8 sacks. You're going to get a lot of pressures. You're going to get some really good run defense. And the Colts are positioned well this year where he doesn't have to carry as much a load. So that's kind of why he fell to number 5. But I don't want to understate how good of a player this is. Like, DeForest Buckner is a playmaker on this defense. We saw him do great things again last year. And hopefully with more help around him and more depth behind him, he can get a little bit lesser of a load this year and still be his dominant self, maybe in like 60% of the snaps instead of like 75 or 70 like it was last year. But DeForest Buckner, you have to shout out his greatness and have him there at number 5 as well.
Yeah, so I'll say my final cuts as well. Blackmon was the one I agonized the most over. Grover as well. That's a guy who, again, that 6-game stretch without him, the difference in run defense was like 45 yards for the Colts per game. Zaire Franklin, who just got named the number 100 top player on the NFL Players Top 100 tonight. Congratulations. He's a guy, there's obviously more to his game, but I think he's a huge piece in the middle of that defense. Great communicator. Juju Brents was my last guy. I really wanted to try and find a spot for, but in that secondary, Julian Blackmon and Kenny Moore are obviously way up a peg. My last guy also was DeForest Buckner. Great run defender, pass rush from the interior, which you hear all the time is a quarterback's least favorite thing to happen to them, getting that pressure right up in their face. Like you mentioned, every year, 7-8 sacks, dozens of hurries and hits. The guy always comes to disrupt. And he can just really, we've seen so many instances where he can just take over games. And he doesn't even have to put up the stats in that particular game to do it. You could see him changing the trajectory of quarterbacks and running backs and just affecting things right away. His frame, of course, is incredible. He's the longest guy on the field. He's like 6'7". But no, he's just a terrific player, and he'll easily go down as one of Chris Ballard's best moves, making that trade. So no, that's a guy who you could argue for him being in the top 3 as well every year. We're really spoiled to have him on the team because, he doesn't get the accolades nationally that he should. It's a deep group across the league, but DeForest Buckner is really the straw that stirs the drink on the defense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, before we get out of here, guys, I do want to remind you that Locked On has launched that first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available in the Amazon Fire TV app, in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. And I want to thank you guys for joining us tonight for this live stream. We're going to get back into the live stream mode here with training camp tomorrow. We are going to be talking just our last little wrap up before training camp starts. Players report on Wednesday. They have practice on Thursday, which I believe Jake will be out there covering. So again, we'll be doing live stream coverage of everything training camp. So if you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.